This house knows how to breathe. I learned its rhythm long before I learned to read the moods of people. In the mornings when the first rays of the Georgia sun slipped through the old pecan trees in the garden, the house inhaled deeply. Dust motes danced in golden columns of light, and the wooden floors creaked softly, as if waking from sleep. In the evenings it exhaled. The air cooled, the beams sighed, and the walls settled into silence. I had lived here for 40 years. Not occupied it. Lived in it. My father-in-law built this house with his own hands. Langston DuBois was a man of quiet strength and rare kindness. He didn't build this place as an investment or a show of wealth. He built it as a promise that his children and their children after them would always have somewhere to belong. I grew into these walls. Or perhaps they grew into me. That morning, like so many before it, I stood in the kitchen making chicken broth with dumplings. The simplest meal. The one my grandmother taught me when I was barely tall enough to see over the counter. Cornelius, my husband, barely ate anymore. The strokes had taken much from him. But sometimes the smell of broth stirred something in him. A flicker of memory, of comfort. As I chopped carrots into tiny jewel-like cubes, I remembered teaching our son Trevant how to do the same. He had stood on a stool beside me, clutching a safety knife with chubby fingers. "Mama, I'm a chef," he'd shouted. We had laughed so hard the kitchen echoed with it. That laughter still lived in the grain of the old wooden table. "Tasteless slop again, Miss Idella." The voice cut through my memory like a cold draft. Kessia, Trevant's wife, stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame in her cream silk robe, arms folded. She never called me Mom. Only Miss Idella. Spoken with a politeness so sharp it hurt more than rudeness ever could. "We talked about this yesterday," she continued. "The internet has millions of recipes. Broccoli cream soup. Gazpacho. Can't you learn something new? Trevant needs proper nutrition." I didn't turn around. I kept stirring the pot. "Your husband loves this soup," I said quietly. "And his father does too." "Father doesn't understand anything anymore," she snapped. "Trevant does. They had been living with us for 3 years. Ever since Cornelius's first stroke. First it felt right. Family should stay together in hard times. I gave them the entire second floor, the master suite with the balcony overlooking the garden. Cornelius and I moved downstairs so he wouldn't have to climb the stairs. But slowly the house changed. Their things crept into every corner. Their smells. Kessia's sharp perfume. Trevant's bitter cologne. The air no longer belonged to us. Last week, she moved my father-in-law's armchair without asking. The one with worn leather arms where Langston used to read the Savannah Tribune every morning. She shoved it into a dark corner and replaced it with a white metal monstrosity. "It doesn't fit the modern interior," she'd said. That night, when everyone slept, I went downstairs and ran my hand over the cracked leather of the chair. Like petting an old loyal dog. I remembered Trevant falling asleep in it as a child, tucked against his grandfather's chest. I remembered sitting in that same chair while pregnant, reading history books, dreaming of returning to my work at the archives. Those dreams gathered dust. Quietly, patiently. Cornelius lay in the old study now, staring at the ceiling. His body was frail, but sometimes his mind burned bright, like an ember refusing to die. I took his hand. His skin was thin and dry like parchment. "They're noisy," he whispered. Yes, they were. Their laughter. Their arguments about money. Their plans. All of it felt foreign in a house built for quiet dignity. When Trevant came down for lunch, he didn't greet us. He sat at the table, eyes glued to his phone. I placed a bowl of soup in front of him. He pushed it away. "Ma, we need to talk." "Seriously." Kessia appeared instantly, sitting beside him, folding her hands like this was a business meeting. "We've been thinking," Trevant said, "about the inheritance, about simplifying things, Father's condition and all that bureaucracy." My chest tightened. "You should sign the house over to me now," he continued casually. "Just a formality." I looked at him. "No." The word came out calm. "Final. This house belonged to Cornelius and me. As long as we lived, nothing changed." That was when everything began to unravel. The word no did not sit well with Trevant. It lingered between us like smoke that refused to clear. He stared at me, searching my face for the softening he'd learned to expect. For years I had bent. For him. For his father. For the family. But something in me had hardened, the way clay does when it finally meets fire. Kessia was the first to recover. "You're being emotional," she said, her tone measured, rehearsed. "We're talking about efficiency. Father's medical care is expensive. We need to streamline assets." "Assets?" I repeated softly. Trevant cleared his throat. "Ma, this house is old. Maintenance alone is a drain. If it's in my name, I can leverage it. Refinance. Invest. It's the logical step." Logical. Such a tidy word to justify erasing a lifetime. "This house isn't leverage," I said. "It's history." Kessia laughed. A short, humorless sound. "History doesn't pay hospital bills." I set my spoon down. The broth rippled once, then stilled. "My husband built his life here," I said. "His father built these walls. You want it because it's valuable now, not because you love it." Trevant's jaw tightened. "That's not fair." "No," I said. "It's accurate." He stood abruptly, chair scraping loudly across the floor. Cornelius flinched in the study. "We'll talk later," Trevant said. "When you've cooled off." That night I couldn't sleep. The house breathed around me, unsettled. I padded quietly into the hallway and stopped short when I saw light spilling from the study. Trevant and Kessia sat at the desk. Papers spread everywhere. Legal papers. Kessia looked up first. Her eyes didn't widen in surprise. She'd expected me. "Oh," she said. "You should be resting." "What are those?" I asked, though I already knew. Trevant sighed like I was a child interrupting adults. "Advanced directives. Power of attorney. Just planning." "For whom?" I asked. "For Dad," he replied. "Someone needs to make decisions." "And someone," I said slowly, "decided that someone wouldn't be me." Silence. Kessia gathered the papers neatly. "You're not equipped for this," she said. "Emotionally. You get attached." I laughed then. A quiet, broken sound. "Yes," I said. "I do." The next morning Cornelius fell. I heard the thud from the kitchen. By the time I reached him, he was on the floor. His body twisted unnaturally, his eyes unfocused. Trevant called the ambulance. Kessia filmed instructions into her phone, narrating like this was content. At the hospital, everything moved too fast. Doctors, nurses, consent forms. Trevant signed them all. I stood there, invisible. In the waiting room, Kessia leaned toward me. "This is exactly why we need control," she whispered. "You freeze." I didn't answer. When Cornelius was stabilized, I went home alone. The house felt different. Colder. As if it knew something precious was slipping away. I went to the attic that evening. No one ever went there anymore. Not since Langston died. Dust coated everything. Old trunks. Boxes labeled in my handwriting. I opened one at random. Inside were documents. Deeds. Wills. Letters. Langston had been thorough. Quiet men often are. I sat on the floor as I read, my heart pounding harder with every page. The house wasn't what Trevant thought it was. It wasn't just a house. It was protected. By morning I understood something important. Trevant and Kessia believed they were planning my future. But Langston, bless that wise, patient man, had already planned theirs. And they had no idea. I slept better that night than I had in weeks. Not because things were easier, but because I finally understood them. The documents in the attic were not dramatic. No threats. No secret vaults. Just careful language, written by a man who understood time better than people. Langston Du Bois had placed the house in a family trust decades ago, long before Trevant was born. Control did not pass automatically to children. Passed only under specific conditions. Conditions that required patience, care, and something Trevant had never practiced, respect. I folded the papers neatly and returned them to the trunk. Some truths did not need to be announced. They needed to be waited on. Cornelius came home 2 days later. We arranged his bed in the study again. He was weaker now, but his eyes followed me as I moved around the room. "You found it," he whispered. I paused. "You knew." He smiled faintly. "My father trusted you." That trust settled over me like armor. Trevant, however, grew impatient. He began scheduling meetings, lawyers, real estate agents, financial advisors. He spoke loudly on the phone, making sure I heard phrases like transfer of ownership and time-sensitive decisions. Kessia started referring to the house as ours in casual conversation. Our house needs better lighting. Our house would sell well. Our house should be modernized. I let them talk. One afternoon, a man in a gray suit arrived unannounced. Clipboard. Polite smile. Assessing eyes. "I'm here for the valuation," he said. "No, you're not," I replied. Trevant stormed down the stairs. "Ma, this is exactly what I mean. You keep blocking progress." "I'm protecting my home," I said. He scoffed. "You're clinging to control." That night they crossed a line. I was helping Cornelius drink water when Kessia entered the study, holding a document. "We've scheduled a signing," she said. "Tomorrow." "For what?" I asked. She placed the paper on the desk. A power of attorney form. My name was absent. "You don't get to do this," I said quietly. Trevant folded his arms. "We already did." I looked at Cornelius. His hand trembled in mine. "You taught him this?" I asked. Trevant exploded. "Stop acting like I'm the villain. I'm doing what's best." "For whom?" I asked. Silence again. Heavy. Revealing. That evening I made a phone call. Not to a lawyer. To a family friend. The next day, Governor Roland Pierce walked through the front door of the house. Kessia nearly dropped her phone. Trevant stood frozen. The governor greeted Cornelius warmly, then turned to me. "Langston's letters were very clear," he said. I handed him the folder. He opened it slowly. Then he smiled. "This house," he said, "cannot be transferred, sold, or leveraged without unanimous consent of the trustees." Kessia whispered. "Trustees?" The governor looked at her kindly. "Yes. There are 3. Trevant swallowed. "Who?" He met my eyes. "You," I said. "Your father." "And me." The house exhaled. For the first time in years it sounded satisfied. The room did not erupt. That was what surprised Trevant the most. No shouting. No accusations. No dramatic speeches. Just silence, thick, deliberate silence, settling over the study like dust after a long-forgotten door had been opened. Kessia recovered first, of course. She always did. She straightened her posture, smoothed the invisible wrinkles in her blouse, and offered the governor a smile that was meant to look composed but came out brittle. "There must be some misunderstanding," she said. "We've been advised." Governor Pierce raised a hand gently. "You've been advised incorrectly." Trevant finally spoke. "Ma, you did this behind my back?" I turned to him slowly. "No," I said. "Your grandfather did. Long before either of us imagined this conversation." Cornelius shifted in his bed. His voice was weak but steady. "Langston always said power should sit with the patient, not the loud." Trevant's face flushed. "So that's it? You called in favors." The governor chuckled softly. "This isn't a favor, son. It's stewardship." He explained everything carefully. The trust. The clauses. The conditions. The protections that activated specifically when coercion, neglect, or financial manipulation appeared. Langston had anticipated pressure. He had anticipated impatience. He had anticipated greed dressed up as responsibility. Kessia's hands curled into fists at her sides. "So what now?" she asked tightly. "Now," the governor replied. "Nothing changes." Those words landed harder than any threat. "You continue living here as guests," he continued, "at the discretion of the trustees. Medical decisions remain shared. Financial authority remains limited. And any further attempt to bypass these protections will be considered breach of trust." Trevant stared at the floor. For the first time he looked young again. Not powerful. Not entitled. Just a boy who had overplayed his hand. That night the house felt lighter. The air moved freely again, like windows had been opened in rooms no one remembered closing. Kessia stopped rearranging furniture. She stopped calling contractors. She stopped speaking in the language of ownership. Her politeness grew colder, sharper but restrained. Trevant withdrew. He avoided the study. Avoided his father. Avoided me. Weeks passed. Cornelius stabilized. Slowly. Painfully. But he stabilized. One afternoon Trevant knocked on my door. Not barged in. Knocked. I didn't mean for it to get like that, he said. I studied him. Intent doesn't erase impact. He nodded. I forgot this wasn't mine yet. I corrected him gently. You forgot it might never be. That truth stayed with him. The house breathed. And for the first time in years it did not sound tired. The shift in the house did not happen all at once. It happened the way real change always does. Quietly, unevenly. In moments that seemed small until they added up to something irreversible. Trevant began waking earlier. I noticed it because the kitchen light was already on when I came down at dawn. He no longer scrolled through his phone at the table. Instead, he sat staring into his coffee, as if it might answer questions he had been avoiding for years. Kessia, on the other hand, grew sharper. Not louder. Not openly cruel. Sharper. She cleaned obsessively, as if control over surfaces could replace the control she had lost over decisions. Cabinets were reorganized. Labels appeared. My jars of dried herbs, collected over decades, were suddenly grouped into neat, soulless rows. Efficiency, she said when I noticed. I let her have that word. Cost me nothing. What cost her was patience. One afternoon, I returned from the pharmacy to find Cornelius alone in the study, his water glass empty, his call button just out of reach. Kessia was upstairs on a video call, laughing too loudly. Trevant was not home. I filled the glass, adjusted the pillows, held Cornelius's hand until his breathing slowed. That night I said nothing. The next morning I called the family friend again. Not the governor this time, but a nurse. Private. Discreet. Scheduled for daily visits. Kessia protested. We didn't agree to outside help. You don't need to, I replied. I did. The nurse, Mrs. Holloway, was kind but observant. She noticed things I had grown used to noticing alone. Missed medications. Delayed meals. The tension in the house that pressed down on Cornelius's chest like invisible weight. Within days the balance shifted further. Trevant noticed too. One evening, he found me in the garden, pruning the roses Langston planted decades ago. He stood there for a long time before speaking. She hates this, he said quietly. I know, I replied. She thinks you're trying to push us out. I finally looked at him. I'm trying to keep your father alive. He swallowed. I didn't realize how much we were taking. That word, taking, hung between us. You were raised here, I said gently. But you forgot how this house was meant to hold people, not squeeze them. The next crack came a week later. Kessia confronted me in the hallway, her voice low and shaking with restrained fury. You planned this, she accused. The trust. The governor. The nurse. You waited. Yes, I said. Because waiting is how you see who someone really is. She laughed bitterly. You think you've won? No, I replied. I think you've revealed yourself. That night she packed a suitcase. Trevant didn't stop her. She didn't leave the house, not yet, but she moved into the guest room, far from the study, far from the sound of Cornelius's breathing, far from responsibility. And that distance said more than any argument ever could. Cornelius's health improved steadily after that. Small gains. Real ones. Appetite. Focus. Strength in his hands. One evening he squeezed my fingers and whispered, You saved more than me. I knew what he meant. The house breathed deeply. And somewhere in that long, quiet exhale, the future began to choose sides. The guest room door stayed closed most days after Kessia moved into it. When it opened, she moved through the house like a visitor, careful, distant, offended by the very air. She stopped pretending to care about Cornelius's schedule, stopped asking about medications, stopped correcting how I folded towels or cooked meals. Withdrawal, I learned, can be louder than control. Trevant tried to compensate. He began hovering, asking questions, offering help too late, staying up late reading medical articles he barely understood. Guilt does that to people. It makes them busy instead of useful. One evening, he insisted on feeding his father. Cornelius tolerated it for exactly 3 spoonfuls. Slow, Cornelius rasped. Not a race. Trevant flushed. I'm trying. I know, his father said. But trying isn't the same as listening. The words landed with the quiet authority of a man who had earned the right to say them. Later that night, Trevant sat with me at the kitchen table. No phones. No defensiveness. I didn't know how much work it was, he admitted. Day after day. I didn't answer right away. I stirred tea leaves slowly, deliberately. Love, I finally said, is repetitive. If someone only shows up for the dramatic parts, they don't actually love the whole. He nodded, eyes fixed on the table. Kessia says you're manipulating me. I met his gaze. Kessia confuses boundaries with manipulation because she's never benefited from boundaries before. He didn't argue. That was new. The next turning point came unexpectedly. A letter arrived. Handwritten. Official. Sealed. Kessia opened it. She read it twice before storming into the study, face pale. They're freezing my accounts, she said to Trevant. My discretionary access. I already knew why. The trust didn't just protect the house. It protected behavior. Certain privileges were contingent on participation in care, cooperation, and good faith. Kessia had withdrawn from all three. Governor Pierce had warned them. Langston had anticipated them. This is humiliating, she hissed. Your mother did this. No, Trevant said slowly. She didn't. Kessia stared at him. You're taking her side now? There are no sides, he replied. There's reality. That night she cried. Not softly. Not privately. The sound carried through the hallway, sharp and jagged. For a moment I felt something close to sympathy. Losing power feels like losing identity to people who confuse the two. But sympathy does not require surrender. The following weeks were quieter. Kessia began job hunting. Remote contracts. Consulting. Things she once considered beneath her. She stopped talking about our future and started talking about my options. Trevant spent more time with his father. Real time. Silent time. Learning the rhythms he had forgotten. One afternoon, Cornelius asked to be wheeled into the garden. I watched father and son sit together beneath the pecan tree Langston planted when Trevant was born. Leaves whispered overhead. Time folded in on itself. You wanted everything fast, Cornelius said. Trevant smiled sadly. I thought that meant success. Cornelius shook his head. It just means you miss things. That evening, Trevant came to me with a question I had waited years to hear. What would you have done differently? He asked. If you were me? I considered the house. The years. The waiting. I would have remembered, I said. That inheritance isn't what you take. It's what you're trusted to protect. He sat with that. The house breathed. And for the first time the silence felt earned. By the time autumn arrived, the house had changed its voice. It no longer sounded strained or guarded. The floors creaked less sharply. The doors no longer slammed from careless hands. Even the air felt slower, as if the house itself had decided it no longer needed to brace for impact. Kessia stayed, but only in form. She moved through the days with purpose now, real purpose, not the performance of importance. Her phone calls were about work, not leverage. Her wardrobe softened. Fewer sharp lines. Fewer armored expressions. Power had once defined her. Now necessity did. One morning she surprised me. I made breakfast, she said. Not asked. Not announced. Simply stated. She stood by the stove stirring oatmeal. No filming. No commentary. Just the act itself. Cornelius ate 2 full spoonfuls before tiring. It was more than he'd managed in days. Kessia watched closely, measuring something new. Not control but consequence. Later she spoke quietly in the hallway. I didn't know how to stay without winning. I studied her face. Staying doesn't require winning, I said. It requires humility. She nodded once. No argument. Trevant noticed everything. He had become attentive in a way that felt almost fragile, like someone relearning how to walk without leaning on entitlement. He handled his father gently now. Waited for responses. Accepted silence. One afternoon, he found an old photo album in the attic. Langston holding him as a baby. Cornelius younger, stronger. Me laughing, unburdened. Why didn't you ever tell me about the trust? He asked. Because it wasn't meant to teach you fear, I replied. It was meant to teach you restraint. He closed the album slowly. I thought responsibility meant authority. No, I said. It means endurance. The nurse noticed the difference too. The house feels calmer, Mrs. Holloway said one afternoon. Patients recover better in calm places. Cornelius smiled faintly at that. Recovery was slow but real. He began reading again. Short articles. Familiar poems. Sometimes he asked me to read aloud. Sometimes he asked Trevant. One evening he reached for Kessia's hand. She stiffened at first, then let herself relax. "You're still here," he said. "Yes," she replied softly. "I am." That word still carried weight. Later that night, Kessia knocked on my door. "I used to think love was leverage," she admitted. "That if I didn't control things I'd disappear." I sat beside her. "You disappear when you refuse to be human." She wiped her eyes. "I don't know how to undo what I broke." "You don't undo," I said. "You repair." Slowly. Without applause. She nodded. The following week, she suggested something unexpected. "Maybe," she said to Trevant, "we should look for our own place. Not because we're being pushed out, but because this house deserves peace." Trevant looked at me. I didn't answer for him. That night the house breathed deeply, longer than it had in years. Not in relief. In recognition. The morning was quiet. Mist curled like smoke above the pecan trees, and the garden glistened with dew. For the first time in years the house didn't seem like a battlefield. It seemed like a home again, patient, watching, alive. I moved through the room slowly, deliberately. Each step measured. Each breath aware. Cornelius was in the study, leafing through one of his old journals, tracing his finger along the margins where he once recorded experiments and ideas. His eyes, though weakened, held a glimmer of the man he had been. I could see it, the ember of sharpness in a mind that had endured too many blows, too many losses. Trevant appeared at the top of the stairs. His posture was cautious. He didn't dare approach too close. The arrogance that had defined him had waned, replaced by something uneasy and new, humility, or at least its shadow. I wanted to apologize," he began, voice small, almost unrecognizable. I did not interrupt. Silence is its own kind of answer. "Everything." I said everything I did, it was wrong, he continued. "I thought power was proof of worth. I thought possession meant respect. I see now. I only ever created fear and pain." I nodded once. Words alone do not repair what has been damaged. Actions do. And actions take time. Kessia joined him, carrying a tray of tea. She set it down without ceremony and sat quietly in the chair beside him. Her eyes met mine for a fleeting second, and I saw a trace of genuine regret. Not contrived. Not performative. Real. The day passed without incident. The house exhaled around us, the creaks and groans of its old bones sounding less like complaints and more like conversations. I walked through the hallways, touching the furniture I had once thought lost to the arrogance of my son and his wife. Each piece carried memories. Cornelius reading by the armchair, Trevant learning to write letters at the study desk, my own hands nurturing every corner, every detail. By evening, I gathered Cornelius in his wheelchair and took him outside. The air was crisp, fragrant with the scent of the pecan trees and the garden's fading blooms. Trevant and Kessia followed at a respectful distance. No words were spoken, none were needed. Even in silence, the shift in our relationships was palpable. Cornelius turned slowly, taking in the garden, the sun setting behind the trees. "It feels like home again," he whispered. His voice was weak but steady, like an old chord struck once more. Trevant stepped forward, his expression tentative. We want to make things right," he said. "I don't know how, but we want to try." I studied him carefully. There was no guile in his tone, no pretense. Only the raw, awkward beginnings of remorse. "You will begin by letting the house breathe," I said. "Let it guide your actions. You will learn patience, respect, and care. And slowly, perhaps, you will understand the life it has held for 40 years before you." They both nodded, uneasily but obediently. The weeks that followed were quiet lessons in humility. Trevant took Cornelius for walks in the garden, learning the routines of care, the rhythms of patience. Kessia helped in small ways, tidying the room she once sought to remake, learning the names and history of each object she touched. And through it all I observed, not with judgment, but with the steady watchfulness of someone who has seen power, fear, and greed and survived. One afternoon, while reorganizing old family photographs, I came across a picture of my father-in-law, Langston, sitting in the armchair by the study window. His eyes met mine through the photo, calm, approving. I understood then that this house remembered everything. The laughter, the tears, the love, the pain. And it forgave not the actions but the willingness to learn. Cornelius, stronger each day, began sharing his memories with Trevant and Kessia. He spoke of his father, of the lessons Langston had taught him, of the quiet joys that built the Dubois family not through wealth or power, but through care, integrity, and love. Trevant listened, sometimes interrupting with questions, sometimes simply absorbing the words like parched earth taking in rain. I sat in the corner watching them. The fear that had gripped the house and all of us for so long was fading, and in its place grew understanding, respect, a slow, deliberate reclaiming of what had been lost, not just the house, but the spirit of the family itself. One evening I found myself back in the basement. I ran my hands over the rough stone walls, the brick Cornelius had pressed to reveal the hidden tin box. I touched it reverently, remembering the power it had given me. The knowledge of truth, the clarity of history, the weapon that became a shield. I did not feel triumph. I felt peace. The box, the papers, the secrets, they had served their purpose. The lesson had been delivered. The house and the family it held could now move forward. Cornelius joined me. He placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did what had to be done," he said. "We are alive, we are together, and we are learning again. That is enough." I nodded. "It is more than enough." We rose together, walking up the steps into the light. The garden waited, the house exhaled around us, and the world outside seemed smaller, quieter, more ordinary than the storms we had weathered within these walls. Trevant and Kessia approached, tentative smiles on their faces. I did not reach for them, nor did I step away. We stood together, a family reborn not through blood alone, but through reckoning, truth, and the patient lessons of time. The house knew what had transpired. Its walls held the echoes of betrayal, but also the echoes of repair. And as I looked at the autumn light falling across the pecan trees, I realized that the true legacy of a home is not ownership. It is memory. And ours was now secure. The past had taught us. The present held us. And the future, fragile and unknown, was ours to shape with honesty, courage, and above all, the knowledge that the quietest hearts sometimes hold the greatest power. I walked through the rooms once more, placing my hands on the furniture, on the walls, on the floorboards that had endured decades of laughter and sorrow. I whispered softly, a promise to the house and to the life it had sheltered. "We will remember. We will honor. And we will continue." The house exhaled one final time that evening, settling, content, at peace, as if it had been waiting for this moment all along. And in that moment I understood that home is not just a place. It is the sum of our love, our care, and the truths we dare to face. And in the silence that followed, I finally felt free. Your opinion is very important to us. If this story touched you, please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Every like, every new subscriber is a huge support for us, and an incentive to continue looking for and voicing new, no less exciting stories for you. It is important for us to know that our work finds a response. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.